Hello and welcome to the Service Operations Podcast. I am your host, 𝗖𝗂𝗵𝗿𝗺𝗺. Our guests are from different industries and functions. They will share their experience, strategies, and the changing landscape to help you take the service operations of your business to the next level. Hello Murli, welcome to the Service Operations Podcast. It's really my pleasure to have you here, and with your experience of 35 plus years, I mean it's a lot that we can learn and understand from you. You having moved from the business to handling large businesses as well as enterprise functions, you can take us through your journey yourself.
Thank you, 𝗖𝗂𝗵𝗵𝗺. Thank you for having me here. In fact, yes, you did. You're right. I've had the advantage of moving from business to enterprise functions, which I think does make a big difference when you run large enterprise functions towards the later part of your career. And I must make this point at the expense of embarrassing you. I have learned about the customer obsession and obsessing about what we do means to the customer from you. In fact, I've seen you running these battles in the executive excom and with the leadership battles, championing the cause of the customer. And you have been an inspiration in the service delivery in the bank. And I must concede that there are quite a few things that I have picked up by just observing you and having you as a colleague in ICICI Bank. Therefore, thank you for having me in this podcast.
You're making me embarrassed actually, but I can fight for the customer.
Thank you. And that I think was a benchmark when we were in ICICI Bank. Will it pass the 𝗖𝗂𝗵𝗵𝗺 test? Okay, that I think was a good question to ask in most of what we do and decisions that we take. Long before the internal ombudsman became formal in the banks and financial institutions, you were that internal ombudsman for the bank. So thank you for having me in this podcast. You, like you mentioned, it's been an advantage for me to have moved from running large businesses to the enterprise functions, primarily because it sets every context with a business relevance in what you do. Whether you run a digital channel, or you run an operations function, or you run a business excellence function, or fraud control, it puts the attention back to saying that how does business benefit from it, and in turn how does the customer benefit from it. That has been a big advantage for me. I don't think many of my colleagues have had that advantage. To that extent, I have had an edge in terms of my experience and the background to be able to kind of figure out what I am doing. How would it have benefited me as a businessman? How would it have benefited the organization in earning the qualification to go back to the customer and ask for more business? Am I doing things which are adding value to the customer? He will be happy enough to write another check to me or through me. Has been a question which drove me through my entire enterprise responsibilities career, which took place in the later part of the journey. Be it operations, be it customer service, be it running the mid office, or any other function which the organization trusted me with. This has been an obsession which has actually driven me. And to that extent, I think these service strategies that I had conceptualized and executed across my career have just had this theme. How does it benefit the customer? How does it benefit the business?
Yeah.
And when there's an A intersection B space that you discover, you have discovered a sweet spot which is repeatable, which is scalable, and also replicable across the enterprise. That's been the theme, 𝗖𝗂𝗵𝗵𝗺.
Yeah.
And I also must mention saying that the State Bank of India and ICICI Bank, where ICICI Bank, I was one of those fairly early members from the time the bank got set up. Both places I got lucky in terms of my assignments. In ICICI Bank, for instance, the bank has the propensity to trust you with responsibilities for which you neither have qualification nor the experience, and they trust you fairly early, and that prepares you like nothing else. And it was a university, and State Bank of India, which what groomed me into becoming a banker. Both these organizations gave me an opportunity to be a well-rounded BFSI professional, and that actually resulted in my running fairly large responsibilities in banking, financial services, and insurance, and to that extent, truly a BFSI professional.
Hmm.
So that's been the journey, Satinder. There is only one thing I remember about the journey is that there has never been a dull moment. I think that doesn't happen in many careers. And every one of those days when I spent 35 plus years in the corporate world, in the BFSI sector, has been a phenomenal journey. Thank you, Satinder.
So, this what you're the experience that you're talking about, like the business handling large enterprises, risk taking, and and especially at a time when there was this entire evolution of the way BFSI sector evolved. uh, I think am I right in saying that all that we will be speaking about is applicable to any industry actually? It's not really just limited to BFSI, because I think the principles are,
Remains remain.
yeah, they remain the same.
I agree with you. If you ever deal with a customer, which is what all businesses in the world will do, some of these principles never become irrelevant. And they will all be relevant as long as there's a customer at the center of your business enterprise. Therefore, because the significant part of the responsibility and experience is from BFSI, I seek your indulgence in littering this with examples from BFSI. But you are right; it is not restricted to just the BFSI sector, but it's relevant across the enterprises where customer becomes the center of your business.
One of the large chunks of work that you did was handling this ICICI Bank contact center. I mean, handling as in you were the business head out there at a time when there was exponential growth. Everything seemed to be growing, and at the same time there was this whole pressure of reducing cost. So how did you tackle that? I mean, that was, I think, one of the very challenging assignments that you did.
That's true. In fact, there were very few assignments which I had sought after in my career, and I
Oh.
think the digital channels were and the contact center was one which I went after, and I really did not get it the time that I wanted it, but I got it at the right time to actually test every possible capability that I had developed in the professional career, because that was the time when ICICI Bank was going through an exponential growth, and contact center was a responsibility. It was in ICICI Bank contact center is not just a service responsibility, but also a business responsibility,
Yeah.
because you deal with cross sell, you deal with multiple things, and the core to the whole strategy, Satinder, has not been restricted to just the contact center as a business, but operations, service delivery, etc. There is something which actually drove my philosophy across all the responsibilities, which is to understand why is the customer seeking you out, be it
Hmm.
at the branch or at the call center or on any other channel. My belief stemmed from the fact that customer is most welcome to visit you, call you, and visit your site, but his or her having to do that is not good. So when the customer chooses to come to you for good reasons, you have an opportunity to talk to him and further your relationship. But if he has to come in, that means
Yeah.
there is a trigger point which has caused him to come. Therefore, I used to obsess with, uh, instead of most of the colleagues who ran the enterprise functions from the capability, capacity, and supply side, saying that how many seats do we have,
Yeah.
what's the headcount that we have, how do we manage the call volumes. I began to think, saying that why is the customer calling in the first place? Can we understand that? I must tell you that this was triggered by one of those strategy papers that I had read, and my
Hmm.
boss used to talk about it from the Fujitsu example, where
Okay.
Fujitsu, when they were a service provider, they began to offer this service to their manufacturing clients like Sony and other folks, saying that pay me for the calls prevented, not from for the calls handled.
Okay.
So that was an intriguing proposition for me. Then I went dug deep into it. I figured out that they understood They understood the core issues of why are the customers calling in the first place, offered to deal with that because in their enterprise they had reasons similar to the ones that are suffered or the experienced by the customers, offered to do a consulting assignment to bring down the friction in the customer service delivery, and made a fortune and a model out of this business. So I said, how can we pick up examples like that and apply it to our workplace? And that's what put me on this course of seeking to understand demand rather than supply. Supply is something which is in front of you, and demand is something that you need to understand for you to be able to meet the demand from the supply that you have. And the second point is, what if you have to apply the theory of constraint, saying that the supply will be limited? Supply limited in the form of
Yeah.
the number of people that you can attract, the number of people that you can train, skill, and be ready to take on the customer request, and also the constraints placed by the organization's own capacity to put out the budgets will always be limited. Okay,
Yeah.
therefore, how do you deal with the conundrum of service from the demand side rather than the supply side? Be it at the branch banking, which I ran for a few years before I moved on to the call center, and say, why are the customers walking into the branch? Why is the customer calling in the first place? Can we understand that and deal with it? That is when the whole thing unfurled to me, and was a learning was phenomenal, because when you approach it from the demand side, you understand the nuances of why the customer is calling. That some of these processes that we run are designed to make the customer call. Instead of for instance, we gave them a service request and we told them, call us after 3 days to
Yeah.
find out what happened to your query. Instead of going back and telling him what happened to it ourselves, we had very lovely channels like SMSs and all that in the old, where you could go back and close the loop with the customer quite comfortably.
Yeah.
And we still had these the snail mail coming into them, and we chose to write to them, while we had created the capability for
Email and
answering email and answering the
calling.
customer beautifully. So we said, if the customer calls, his customer writes, he has reached the peak of his tolerance, and
Yeah.
therefore he's already irate. You're writing out a mail, holding response to him in the snail mail is not going to help him. Can we manage the demand differently? So the demand management, Satyendra, was the theme, which across the channels I have found it very useful. Since you understand the demand, you understand the components of demand. The components of demand meaning, when does the demand peak?
Yeah.
When does the demand less? What
Yeah.
is the different types of demand which come to you? And map the demand to, then when you understand the demand, it helps you understand the capability required. It helps you understand the technology required. It helps you understand the organization structure required. It helps you understand the methodizing that you need to do and the processes that you need to follow. It helps you understand the policies and processes that you need to change to be able to meet that demand. So this approaching it from the demand side, Satinder, does give you multiple options to go deal with the customer's requirement and his dilemmas, and that kind of sets you up on a course which you never anticipate. If you
Yeah.
recollect,
Yeah.
with the demand management is what led us to think, from a 45% first contact resolution, how can you take it to a 95%?
Mm.
And then you, because you have had the worn the hat of a businessman, you go work with the business to showcase
Yeah.
to them, saying that if you take the first contact resolutions to 95%, how you would be able to, with the same number of people, be able to answer things in such a way that you free up time of the channel and the resources to be able to attend to things. For
Yeah.
example, you will recollect saying that if 92% of the time when somebody asks you for a waiver of the first time delayed payment was a yes from the business, why take it as a deviation? And to an extent that it's about 1,500, 2,000 rupees is the first time waiver that is being sought. Why don't we let people close it on the call? It resulted in a dramatic 10-11% drop in the calls. And when you tell people, saying that, if you don't tell people, saying that, leave this request with us, we will let you know the service request number, and you configure the systems to be able to trigger off an
Yeah.
SMS to this customer, and then you tell him, don't have to call back. We will tell you
Contact.
that this service has been dealt with. Customer is interested not in calling you.
Yeah.
His demand on his time is also fairly fierce, and therefore he'll be very happy if you go back and close the loop with him. That saw drop in the repeat calls to the extent of 9. Like this, each of these things added up to almost 25-30% of the call reduction, which meant that out of a 4,500 seats, you have released 1,500 seats for additional capacity to be done. That was the charm of the demand management, Satyinder. And of course, because you asked this specifically, later on when I moved to run the global operations piece,
Yeah.
I pretty much followed the same thing. We spent 2 or 3 full days with the entire operations team to understand where is the demand coming from, what kind of transactions come in, what time do they come in, like the McDonald's
Yeah.
case study, time, motion, units which come in, and do we keep the loop with the customer closed, do we track the units, and
Yeah.
multiple things. I mean, you might want to pick on specific things to expand
Yeah.
from.
Yeah. So what I heard you say in this, what you have done, one is empowerment, clearly. I mean, you're actually empowering the people in the front line to just finish it off, rather than go all over the place.
Sure.
And we found that that's one of the big reasons of delays and irritation to the customer. Second, very important thing is you spoke about what I like to call a conducive structure. That
Sure.
is, the friendship, business friendship with all those for whom you're actually working. I think that's like a really, really key thing that you're talking about. And one third thing, which I just picked up from what you were saying, is communication. Because the whole game is about communication. It's like, what do you communicate to the customer so that he doesn't come to you? It's a very important part of,
Sure.
demand management. Another thing that I wanted to ask you, that generally there is this restraint in empowering.
Sure.
So now, with all your experience, how do you think this works? I mean, why do businesses, not business as in, the person who's holding the P&L, why don't they like to give a little?
In fact, the I mentioned to you about the benefit of having moved from the business. The benefit positioning came to be naturally when I did these jobs, Satinder. See, empowerment is very scary, especially at the frontline level and at the call center, call agent level,
Yeah.
because people don't know whether it will be handled responsibly.
Yes.
My belief is that for even the youngsters, my trust on the youngsters is that they are a lot more conscious and responsible than we ever were in their age. So
Yes.
that's my first belief, and it led me to think that, look, if we give them a framework for applying these choices and keep the framework simple,
Simple.
okay. For instance, is it the first time or the second time the customer has delayed payment? And is the value of reversal less than 1,500 rupees? And the third vertex in the decision making is, if 85 to 90% of the time when you throw this up to your boss or the business and the answer has been a yes,
Yes.
we are no longer
Yeah.
dealing with an exception, we are
Yes.
dealing with a norm. If that is the case, why don't we make that frontline person look good in the eyes of the customer? Okay.
So I
So
completely
the
agree with you.
conversation,
Yeah.
like you said, the communication completely changed,
Yeah.
saying that when the customer asked this youngster on the phone, how long will it take for you to take a decision? The youngster was empowered to say, sir, don't worry,
Just now.
I will do it
Yeah.
myself. And while he's on the call, he or she who is speaking to the customer said, sir, done. Next time around, please be careful. We may not have a chance to reverse this again. Okay, therefore, it became such a delight for the customer. In a way, it made business sense, because you are expecting someone with a significant seniority to be dealing with a day-to-day reversal of approvals, and it anyway was happening as a matter of routine. So therefore, empowerment I had a very wise boss called Gopinath, and he used to
Yeah.
say, "Trust people,
Yeah.
but verify."
Hmm.
So, trust and verify used to be the check and balance in every empowerment there is. Trust people to exercise the choice, but periodically verify whether it is exercised in the form that you had envisaged. Okay,
Hmm.
then don't immediately change your trust, but go and change the way that you will administer the trust. So,
Yeah.
to that extent, it was a very good, move actually that at the call center.
Hmm.
Second, what you said was to create this. The conducive environment is what I call the benefit positioning, Satinder.
Yeah.
Because when do businesses warm up to your idea? When they say that either increases their productivity, it increases the sale, or it
Reduces them.
reduces the cost. If one of the three items in their P&L, you are going to contribute in making that better, who will say no?
Yeah.
I have found senior business leaders changing policies, approving changed processes without even a moment's hesitation when you go and link it to what you're suggesting, either enhancing the customer service, reducing the turnaround time, bringing down the risk,
Yeah.
bringing down the cost, or your opportunity to cross sell. If you point that out to one of these five things, I have never, I'm saying never, in capital letters, had a difficulty in getting things communicated to the business in such a way that they will only say yes. So
Yeah.
that has been the biggest learning and the orientation that running businesses brought me to.
Hmm.
Other parts, Satinder, it is this is my pet theme, and I think I will encourage the listeners to think about it. Never call your service outlet a back office, because there is nothing called back office in the banks. When you are doing the onboarding, you are a part of the sales function. When you're dealing with the customer's request, you are a part of the service function. And when the customer moves away and moves from you, you become a part of the team that passes on the lead for retention or for
Retention.
upsell.
Yeah.
And back office is only when you don't have anything to do with the customer. And the contact center, operations, and business and the channels like branch banking have got nothing to do with back office. Every damn thing that they do impacts business and the customer in a positive way, and you have a chance to do that. Therefore, I used to fight these battles in the boardroom and in the Mancom, saying that we are not back office. Stop saying that, because when you code somebody as a back office, the behavior is different.
Yeah.
When you call that as an integral part of the business function, then the behavior is different. You don't call somebody a back office and expect that person to act empowered, which is
As a
silly.
front office. Yeah.
Which is silly. Therefore, you already asked him to behave like a back office, and you're expecting saying that he's not exercising discretion. You have told him not to. You have asked him to take instructions.
Backseat.
Why would you expect to? That's it.
Hmm. Yeah, 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 yeah. So you know what? Now I'm just moving this ahead, and today, and this is as consumers also we face this. So we seem to have everything which is digital. So which means that as far as possible, there is no human contact between the company and the consumer. As consumers, there is no place to reach out to the company. It's all blocked, and it's not just blocked in the digital mode. I also find that there are many companies, there won't be an email available. You're still searching from where do I go and talk to them. So now what you said and what is happening, there is contradiction. So how do you think the current way in which we are moving towards, like, every company is in a different stage, how do you think we can apply this when
Very
we don't
interesting.
want we don't want an interaction?
Actually, Satyan, that this is not a new problem. When the channels, ATMs came, what are the mistake that we did? Instead of migrating transactions, we migrated customers.
Yes, perfect.
Very,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
very unwise thing to do. Similarly, when we automate and digitize things, instead of humanizing transactions, we are digitizing human transactions. So, do you use technology to humanize the service experience, or do you use the technology to digitize completely impersonal delivery. Let me give you an example. For instance, uh, we all use travel sites. Okay,
Yeah.
when you are at the verge of completing a transaction, and when the AI engine at the back end suggests to this contact center agent saying that Murli was trying to book this ticket, just at a time when he was keying in his password, the site got
Right.
disconnected.
Huh.
Within a second, if you get a call from this service provider saying that Mr. Murli, you were trying to book a ticket, we saw that just as you were doing this transaction, completing the transaction, it didn't go through. We don't want you to be starting from the. We will
Yeah.
recreate this up to the stage when you have to do this. Just put the CVV number and this thing. We will complete this transaction for you from here. You are humanizing the service process using a digital intelligence. Okay.
Hmm.
Similarly, in the channels also, everything which is an exceptional transaction gives you a chance to go back and create an experience for the customer. For instance, one of the a small team that we set up in the contact center, we had these trauma calls which used to come saying that somebody said I met with an accident, or my bag has got picked in the airport, I want to stop the thing. one increment One incremental step that you used to do is to first things first check with this person. If you had lost, if your bag got lost or picked, and you lost an ICICI bank credit card, it's quite possible that you had many other credit cards. Would you like us to help you block those cards as well? Imagine this customer is sitting in Hong Kong, or South
Yeah.
Africa, or a
Hmm.
game safari. He has to make multiple international calls to do that. And if your service provider that you called first says, "Can you help us do this?" It's a wow for that person. It's such a relief for that person. Similarly, when people call to register a claim for a thing, first things first that you ask is to figure out whether has there been any major
Yeah.
loss either
Accident
for the
all over.
car or
Yeah.
for the people. And in the area that you live, do you know that we have arrangements with this one, two, three service
Hmm.
providers and the hospitals? Can we talk to them and to make sure that they are ready to receive you when you go there for help? It blows the customer away in terms. Similarly, why did ClearTrip at some point in time had an advantage over this? They cracked the refund process. They were able to tell the customer refund is an exceptional transaction in the travel side. They
Yeah.
said in 4 days. Now people do that in a couple of days, but at that point in time, they said in 4 days the money will be in your account. It's our responsibility. So you have an opportunity using the digitization, using the technology to be able to create that magical experience for the customer. Customer doesn't have to know that it is the technology and analytics which happened with, but you humanize that process by harnessing what technology and digitization can do to you, and bring that closure interface in the form of a human conversation, or a conversation or an exchange between the customer which is as close to and as personal as what the face-to-face meeting would have rendered. So
Yeah.
all these, while we think through most of our service delivery for the business as usual transactions, can you think through this? Because this is also a demand. This is an unusual demand.
Hmm.
Unusual demand
Hmm.
results in unusual loss or unusual opportunity to create an impact on the customer. That's the approach, Sadhguru.
Yeah, and I think it applies to in whichever mode, because we are getting this. We get to hear, we are fully digital. And the general impression is that if you're fully digital, it means that there is no human interaction. But it just goes the other way, and it can get very suffocating for the customer because he doesn't really know, where he's going. That
Sure.
I can remember, of course, many of them, and especially blocking of card, to move it up the IVR,
Sure.
because at that
Sure.
time the customer is so panic. You don't need to get him to authenticate and
I
things
agree.
like that, and then many such steps. But what you're saying is that the thinking has to be that way. The
Thank you.
thinking has to be that, yes, this is what needs to be done. That's very interesting. Now, the obvious next question which is coming to my mind is that in a large organization, or even maybe smaller organizations with, which are growing, different teams or different departments are at different levels of, you might call it progress or maturity. Now, one of the projects that you did was to bring about this, bringing them to the same level. So tell us
Sure,
something about that, because we
sure.
knew there are some which had some working on spreadsheets, and some had the best technology possible in the same organization.
Sure. In fact, I'll step back a little bit, Satinder, and the other pet obsession I had is to say, can you methodize what you do? So, what is the difference between a method and the process? You, when you choose a method, the process follows. Okay,
Yeah.
like drinking water, drinking safe water is the end objective. You sometimes boil, you use Kent RO or Eureka Forbes, or you sometimes do the filtration, but the method that you choose dictates the process. Therefore, I have always asked if the moving pieces in the organization are at different states of evolution. Does one part of the organization know about the benefits which are being reaped by the other part of the organization?
Yeah.
How can they socialize it? Okay, and you have seen it in many times, be it implementation of CRM, from the most expensive CRM that you had to the
Yeah, just
switching
one.
to a,
In
yeah,
fact, I was just when I was trying to think, I realized that it actually takes about 3 to 4 years, to reach that those kind of levels, especially when you're dealing with a very democratic kind of an organization.
sure.
And I was also seeing that we did one portion in 1 year, then we got moved to the next, and then to the next. So it was that much of a gap.
That is true. You're right. Absolutely. How do you bridge that gap? Is it goes back to the part that I talked about, benefit positioning.
Yeah.
Satyan.
Okay.
In fact, this different stage of evolution, if you have to move, for instance, if somebody had moved from CBEL to the uh,
Fit.
CRM introduced, which is an integral part of the core banking system,
Hmm.
Pinnacle CRM, the earliest the previous organization which had implemented that was concurrent user 45, total user 400, and you were to roll out with concurrent user total user 8500, concurrent user 1000. So you have to think scale, and when you think scale, there are two or three underlying things which happen. One is, whatever you have created within one, can you repeat? Can you
Yeah.
repeat in such a way that the entire enterprise adopts it? Can you repeat with the similar set of, or the coherent set of people, or the cohort that you create? Second is, whatever you have created for 400 people, how do you scale it up to 4,000 people? And the third question is even more important, Satinder. Who else will benefit from this? Who
Hmm.
else will benefit from this? Which are the other similar similar organizations within this organization who may be suffering from the same issue? Can you go and talk to them about what have you done, what are the benefits you got, would you like to adopt it? So you crash this 2 to 3 year timelines to a few months, because when you go talk to them saying that, look, we had similar issues like this is what we tried,
Hmm.
this is a result that we have got, and you showcase an outcome, one of the five outcomes that we talked about: risk, cost, customer
Yeah.
service, CAT, or the productivity. And people sit up and take notice. And then the next question I have always confronted with is to say, what will it take for us to repeat here?
Hmm.
When the business becomes a sponsor, saying that, hey, whatever you did in retail, can you please replicate in SME? Can you please replicate in corporate?
Perfect.
Then the magic happens. Then they assign the best of their resources who are responsible for one of these five business functions, and they become a partner. Otherwise, you don't get sponsorship, you don't get money, you don't
Yeah.
get the budget, even if you're convinced that that's good for the organization.
Hmm.
Therefore, you are never far away from a salesman's role in your entire career,
Yeah,
Satinder.
that is
Whether
true.
you are running sales, whether you're running businesses or operations or you need to sell constantly the benefit of why do you think it's good for
Hmm.
you.
Hmm.
Because my belief is that all our schedules are so punishing that we don't know what we want till the time somebody comes and tells us, this is what
Yeah.
we have, would you like to do it?
Yeah.
Then we wake up and say, hey, can you do this, can you do this more, can you
Yeah,
add
and
on
then
this?
it doesn't end, huh? It's
It doesn't end.
yeah.
So for people to get interested, you need to go and trigger this off, and then
Yes.
they suddenly pick this up,
Yeah.
which is when you become very popular.
Hmm.
So across the functions, I have never waited for the businesses to come and ask me,
Hmm.
can you solve this for us? I walked across and said, we solved a problem like this in the branch banking. We seem to think this part of your organization seems to have similar functions like this. Would you like to give it a try? They pick it up.
Yeah. So, what I'm just picking up from what you're saying is that all that you said now is not just applicable to large organizations. I think it is even applicable to a 5-member team.
It
Because
is.
this, it's just you're picking up that principle and applying it over here. You don't really need to have that kind of large structures.
That's true.
And the other thing that I just picked up from what you were saying is that uh, a company may have, say, 5 or 6 different products. They may be at different stages of their maturity,
Sure.
but the customer could be using 3 or 4 of these products, and then that's when the customer comes and tells you that you are doing this over here and you aren't doing it here. I mean,
Correct.
they expect you to give a consistent or a standardized kind of service. But now that's bringing me to the next question of this service integration. I mean, that's one
That's true.
of your
Yeah.
another pet
Yeah.
subjects, that how do you integrate service
Yeah.
of different products so that the customer has the same experience when he deals with the company.
To be fair, Satinder, I followed a lazy man's approach in service integration. Okay, this tool is existing in the quality world. It's called the tapping the customer creativity. How do you tap customer creativity? You know that the best person to describe the issues and compare it with something else that he's going through is the customer.
Yeah.
So do you create the listening post capabilities within the organization, which says, when the customer says, what nonsense is this? I'm getting the same service from your cards team. You say it's not available here. Create this mechanism and process to pick it up and give it to you as a service owner. So when you hear this 2 or 3 customers saying about the same thing, then you know that there is a integration opportunity begging to be exploited. So
Yeah.
you're not tapping your internal brainstorming to, you're tapping the customer's creativity, saying that, look, the same part of the same organization, different forms of service that I'm experiencing, that is a friction. So service integration is nothing but removing the friction between the organization and the customer, because customer would like to experience you as a single organization.
Yeah.
You are letting the customer experience you at multiple. For instance, the wealth management team will promise, I'm the single point of customer. The SME will say, I'm the single point of customer. And one statement for buying a visa, for taking a visa from an embassy, all these guys will say, no, 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 I have access to this information. I mean, I'll certify this for you. So suddenly the integrated view of the customer, which is available to the customer, you're shamefully exposing the customer to the fact that you don't have it. That's the friction that you need to pick up very, very early in as many ways as the customer is saying. Create those listening posts which pick this up and tell you,
Yeah.
Satinder, looks like we are doing this well in this, but we are not giving the same experience in this vertical.
Yes. Yeah.
Get these 2 guys to integrate it. That is,
Mm.
you integrate one after the other, suddenly you find that the customer experiences the whole organization in a similar way.
Yeah.
That's been the approach.
And also, as you're saying, it is not just the customer today. I mean, today Swiggy is equal to Uber, is equal to Amazon, is equal to the bank, and everyone is, I mean, that's where how we compare. So today, the listening post has to be so sharp that it is not just within a company, it is also between industries, between companies, I mean, it's like everything is being compared to everything.
Okay. So today the listening posts are digital.
Uh,
They come in very, very different form. They come in the form
mm,
of glass doors. They come in the form of hate mails which float in the system. They come in the form of Instagram posts. They come in the form of Twitter. If you don't get annoyed and you pick this up as a friction to be solved, then the customer is screaming. Not only he's pain, but he's also offering a solution, saying that look at what these guys are doing. Why don't you guys do it? You must have the humility and patience to walk across and say, hey, look, this customer seems to say that you got it right. Can we learn it from you? If you do that, then you suddenly become a lot more accessible both to the customer and for the people who can teach you what to do.
Yeah.
Innovation in my mind is not discovering something new, but can you adopt something which is happening elsewhere and make it work elegantly for your context is equal
Yeah.
to innovation that you would do for the new cousins.
Yeah.
So customer, uh, Satinder, plays many roles. One of the roles that you should allow him to play is to let him tell you what do you think will help in solving the problem. You are the person. I mean, there are architects, there are chartered accountants, there are lawyers, there are other people saying that, sir, do you have a suggestion for us? Is the great way to get the customer involved in
Yeah.
solving the problem.
Yeah. So it's been like a nice and rich discussion with you, and all the principles and concepts that you're talking about are as relevant, and I think they will continue to be relevant till such
Relevant.
time there is a customer and a company.
Sure.
So thanks for sharing your experience. Murli, is there something, some message that you would like to give, the listeners?
Actually, the message makes you appear like you know it all. Okay.
Yeah.
Therefore, I would rather the perspective I'd like to share with folks who are listening to the podcast, Satinder, is to say that if you have to choose the path to understanding what will work, approach it from the demand side, not from what you have. So I think that's a very good starting point, irrespective of which function you do. Even when you do a business function, start from where the demand is coming from. Therefore, I think it's useful for you. It'll help you plan better. Second, I think is to say, is there a friction in what we are doing? Is there a friction in what we are doing? And actively pursue this thought with the businesses, which are the internal customers, with the external businesses, and listen and create. Third, of course, is ask this question repeatedly, saying that, hey, I have created this. Can this be repeated across a 5-member organization or 1,000-member organization without the customer experiencing a dissonance? Okay,
Hmm.
is it repeatable? Therefore, if it is to be repeatable, it has to be simple, and simplicity needs to reduce it to a level where you expect this 3-month-old from the college campus to be able to understand and deliver the service well. Is it repeatable? Second thing you would ask is, if it's repeatable, can it scale up? Is it scalable? If both happen, then you step back and say, hey, I've been able to repeat it in this part of the organization. It has scaled up. Can this be replicated elsewhere? And when you do that, you suddenly go looking for friction which happens to the customer from across the organization and eliminate it. It becomes a service integration that you talked about. So some of these things will appear fairly simple and I mean
Easy
not
to
very
do.
exotic, not very
Yeah.
exotic
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
easy. But simplicity does require a hard work, lot of hard work, and putting the customer at the center of your planning has always paid off. Eliminate the friction for him, make it repetitive across your team, replicate it to some other place where the customer may be dealing with you, and make sure that it's so simple that it can sail well. If you ask me, these are 4 or 5 things which I think will never fail. And never underestimate the power of the customer to come and suggest to you what will help him if you do.
So thank you.
That's about it.
Thank you so much, Murli, for your time and for sharing your experience. Uh,
Thank you, Satinder.